So we at InnAccel during the lockdown built a non-invasive ventilation system for COVID patients and also a patient interface, something called a CPAP helmet or a hood. Thank you, Munir. This is sort of covering over the head, which allows ventilation of the patient without allowing their infectious exudates and exhalations out. Uh, it was used a lot in Italy and China in the first wave. Uh, so in July, we launched these two products. We were, supported in our endeavor by a bunch of organizations. One of them called ACT, Action COVID Team, a group of venture capitalists who got together and raised money for this. Thermax Engineering, they partnered with us pro bono on development of the helmet. It was great. It was great, the spirit that was shown by large organizations, startups, all of them, in coming together to fight this.
So very happy to see the fraternity join in, and I hope you're all in good health and are keeping safe. Thank you very much for taking the time out today and joining in during this difficult time. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received 150 registrations, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are members and are repeat visitors to our webinars, which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online channels as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the BlueCircle is an exclusive community and ecosystem which is curated for business leaders across 6 sectors, which are healthcare, e-mobility, energy, real estate, logistics, and aerospace and defense. We also present socioeconomic insights which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. And now in response to the COVID challenge, the BlueCircle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series in our digital publication. And in addition to this, you'll be happy to know that we very recently launched the first version of the BlueCircle app, which is curated for leaders. It's somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for leaders, a space that brings them together to have meaningful conversations, connect with each other, house high-quality curated content, and also provide access to business opportunities across our core sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do join us. I will also share the link to the app in the chat section, and we'll soon be sending out invitations to our new guests post our webinars. We've also begun our selective outreach and have close to 3,000 leaders who have joined the waitlist for the community app. And today, as part of our innovation series, we're privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry to join in for our healthcare community's discussion. Topic is how COVID-19 ignited innovation in medical devices and diagnostics. And now in the best interest of time, I will very briefly mention the names and designations of our panelists. We have with us Mr. Jayanth, Bhuvaraghan, Senior Advisor and Coach, Essilor Luxottica, Dr. Puneet Kumar Nigam, Chief Quality Officer, Metropolis Healthcare, Mr. Siraj Dhanani, Founder and CEO, InnAccel Technologies, and the chair and moderator for the session is Dr. Vijay Raaghavan, Director Healthcare, PwC. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in. And now I request Dr. Raaghavan to please chair and moderate the session.
Hey, thanks so much, Gautam. I'm just wanting to take us all back in the time machine, 563 days back when COVID struck us. And then, if we had to reimagine what was the situation we were in, right? We had locked house, we had locked the people in homes, and the virus was completely unlocked, spreading all over the place. Right? We had to cover, let's take India, at least we had to cover about 3,200 odd square kilometers with just 1 million doctors. And the target then I remember was we need to do 2 million tests a day to spot the virus fast, catch it early, and get going. Now, this is where we were put to. And very interesting today when we look back at the challenge we were confronted with, right? And where we are today, significant progress. And that's the power of going back to basics, applying first principles approach, and solving problems. We today have more entrepreneurs who've come in and are solving the problem. We have far more resilience built in the systems. And then, yes, we have more innovative mindsets coming in for sustainable solutions like that, right? And so COVID happens to be just one of the virus which provoked us to take a very strategic action in the way we do. Thanks so much for this. And, I have a fantastic panel, and, I can be rest assured, Gautam, like you put it out, amazing bunch of leaders, very different perspectives. And for the ones who are part of it, you will take home a lot of lessons in terms of what transpired from thought process to making things happen. Because all the three we have, be it Siraj or Jayanth or Puneet, they're all doers. They talk less and do more, and they have done it. So let me, without wasting much of my time, let me come back to the basics today. We'll run past in three logical steps. We start with going back to basics, which is since that day, that 563 days back, whatever that day, we all were faced to a situation to solve a problem. Since that day till today, what has changed from then on in the way you think differently? Right? That's the first question I want to put into us. And then let's move into the next. Once we understand, what changed, we'll try to ask them, the panelists, on how did they renew their thinking and how did they apply their logic and bring things to action, ensure that the virus was stopped, diseases were stopped. Like today we have 30 million people who are affected, 4 million deaths in the country alone. How did that, how did we bring down that entire rate of spread, and how did we reduce our mortality and morbidity? So that's the second part. And finally, I think there's no less future perspective than thinking sustainable value that we're going to create. So end of it, we'll think about what's in it in the future. Beyond this, what are the learning curves and how well are we prepared for the next set of fights? So without wasting much time, let me open the floor to my panelists with my very first question. That from that day we detected this virus, what's changed and how differently have you started thinking as an entrepreneur or someone who's moving this industry? So let me start with Siraj. Siraj, your thoughts and your perspective.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you all for having me on this very high-powered and esteemed panel. As you rightly mentioned, COVID was in some ways a bolt out of the blue for all of us who were going about our own ways and trying to build our businesses. For InnAccel, it was a particularly, at least it seemed at that time, a particularly bad timing, because we had just launched our portfolio of first in the world medical technologies, which obviously had nothing to do with COVID. These were being developed for the last 6 years. And all of our purchase discussions just stopped. They ground to a halt because budgets were being diverted to COVID purchases very rightly, because we needed the basics at that time. We also were in discussions with an investor for raising capital. And as you can imagine, the uncertainty put all that on hold as well. So for us, it was a very trying time when it began. Besides the obvious health implication, we were, very seriously looking at what this means for our fledgling venture. But I'm glad to say that, we converted the crisis into an opportunity, and with some, crazy hard work by the team and some deft engineering, we were able to, not only pivot, but also contribute in our little way to mitigating the impact of this crisis, something I'd love to talk in more detail about. But yeah, it was definitely a very transformational moment for a lot of us who are trying to run our businesses.
Hey, thanks. I think you put it rightly, Siraj. It's both out of the blue, and I completely recollect situations where, the diagnostic leaders, the hospitals, all are in a state of shock. How do we go about it? What's the first step to take, right? We always are used to a situation where diagnostic as an industry starts the step one, and we know that 70% of a doctor's decision come from tests, results, and you feed into that, and then you take your judgment call. But here was a situation where diagnostics had to move from a sensing mode to a acting mode, because it was so demanding that you couldn't reach the million doctors and none of the patients would ever go to a doctor at that time, and doctors themselves were also struggling with the COVID on one side, and on the other side, you need to bring technologies into homes so that you sense fast and complete the scan to catch the virus, right? So very rightly said, we are all in the bolt of the blue, searching for what do we do, how do we go about. So it was very powerful, powerful, very well articulated from your end. From now we move on to Jayanth. Jayanth, and I think you've stuck to basics, and the way you've looked at what all can we search for as ways to solve a problem. I think your hat must have started from there. That how do we start thinking differently? Tell us how did you go through, and what was the learning curve?
Sorry, I was muted and I was talking. So I hope you can hear me now. So thank you very much, Vijay, and thank you to all my esteemed panelists. So it's really a pleasure to be here. Well, as we all said, COVID hit us out of the blue. It has thrown everything out of gear. We all know that. And the healthcare sector has been bearing the brunt. But having said that, I think in most of the sectors, and particularly in the healthcare sector, the innovations have been driving the growth of the sector over the years now. But I think what has changed literally in the last 563 days, as you very articulately put it, I think COVID has forced us to accelerate all these innovations in a very shorter, compressed time frame and drastically reduce the time to market. So we had to quickly think about ideas, scale them and deploy them as quickly as possible. This was a complete change. The other thing is also that it may sound cliched, but it forced us to actually think more out of the box, because there were no existing solutions and we had to come up with newer and quick and impactful solutions in that sense. And also, I think most often innovation is always associated with high-tech, high-end, AI, ML, big technology, big data. Well, that is innovation, but in addition to that, I think it threw up a number of smaller innovations, impactful innovations, which people could do, ultimately with the aim of creating better healthcare access, diagnosis, and impact. And I think all this together has happened in the last 18 months or so. And, I represent the eye care sector. I'm not a big healthcare specialist. I can talk about the eye care in general. But in the eye care sector, just to give you a context, roughly about 1/3 of the world, about 2.5 billion people don't see well because they don't have glasses and they don't have access to a prescription. So our focus in the last over 10, 15 years has been to find solutions to create access, first-time access to the 2.5 billion people. So to that end, actually, we set up an innovation lab called the Base of the Pyramid Innovation Lab in Singapore and in India, because we knew that the existing products and solutions will not be enough and will not work in these far-flung villages. So we had to come up with out-of-the-box diagnostic solutions, simple diagnostic solutions, products, and business models to reach these 2.5 billion people. But what COVID did was, all the efforts that we were taking over the last 10 years, we accelerated them. We increased the speed substantially and brought in a lot of new products into the market to solve to adapt to this new situation. So basically, with all the innovations that we were in the pipeline and the new ones which came up, COVID forced us to accelerate and also to adapt in the new situation in the developed markets. So that's where we are.
That's a very interesting lens, what you brought up, Jayanth. I said, going back to basics, looking at what small innovations can bring to the larger problem and how can it be sorted and solved. I'm recollecting even simple things like contact tracing, which was manually done, where health workers would call up families and ask, like ASHA workers would call up and ask, not the smartphones, but on the normal phones, and ki behan aap theek ho. Basic things could get a lot of data to central to take action in terms of symptom level. So those innovations, from however small they are, meant a lot of difference in ensuring that they're able to stay connected with the billion people's homes. because most of them were all inside the homes. Right? And to your point on this being a culmination of the beginning of accelerating all that were done in the past, and culmination of those efforts leading into product launches. I myself have witnessed more than 60, 70 odd digital product launches coming out of COVID problem statement using the first principles approach. So I've seen multiple innovations there. So yes, that's taken to that point. And very interesting to wrap your point on, smaller innovations accelerating a situation which is bolt on the blue. Of the lot, right? The ones who were hard pressed, to take action and make things happen, because the mandate that was bestowed upon them was not about sensing, not about testing, but about treating. Right? And I would really have a soft corner for the diagnostic chains. And Dr. Puneet is part of that. And hats off to the way things have, been maneuvered. I know the first set of tests, we were doing about 10, 12,000 tests a day when we just began. And the pressure was on every diagnostic lab to come out of the results in less than 2 days' time to show the results. And from the 2 days to now, Dr. Puneet is talking about 2 minutes. It's been a massive transformation. So, Dr. Puneet, back to you. How did the thinking gaps, how did the thinking gaps be so different to post-COVID? What else did what did you have to think differently to get us to this point?
So I'll just start when it all began. In the month when the lockdown was announced, everything came to a standstill. Even the labs were kind of suspended. We are part of the essential healthcare services. We were running the labs, but the strategy on COVID testing was not very clear. And government took a week or two to start creating the strategy. And in that time, we were actually thinking how the situation is going to evolve, because the developed countries had some experience, but we may behave differently. So once the initial guidelines came, we were trying to align as quickly as possible. So daily reviewing, daily aligning, and thinking where the future is going to be. So we had one lab to begin with in March, which was, competent to do COVID testing as per the ICMR norms. And we realized immediately, because all logistics was shut. So traditionally, the model is that you send samples in a hub and spoke, model from one lab to the other lab. The specialized test, molecular testing being specialized, was done in very few labs. So that was a problem, that logistics is not working. And even in essential health services, the logistics was not working. So how to operate and how to bring the samples. So we started thinking of project management, because we realized that at some stage it is going to it is going to affect the whole nation, and the testing has to be done in different geographies. So from that one lab, in 10 months, we set up 12 labs. And we got a lot of learning. We are very used to opening new labs, but those timelines are, 3 months to 6 months. But here the squeeze was that we are supposed to open the lab in a month's time. And NABL also used to take up to 3 months to give accreditation to a lab. And from the initial few months, they started giving it in 7 days. So to create a COVID lab, get it approved, became a process of just 30 days from a usual, 6 months. So that was a great learning for us, great alignment from the government side also to support the private players, because when we started, the thinking was what government will do, what private sector will be allowed to do. And as the COVID evolved, we realized that this thinking has to give way to, working together, collaboration, and a lot of confidence over the year has come. And I think now everybody realizes that private sector is also part of the same healthcare system. And until unless we work together, the pandemic kind of situation cannot be managed. And what we have learned, yes, we have learned now to scale up very quickly. That you need an internal competency capability to have a project management team which scales up as it is needed. And the technology also changed. So initially the molecular testing, the test which was available was almost taking 8 to 12 hours. Now the technology which has come can give a result as fast as a minute. And so the expectations have changed. Once the partial opening came in, the airlines wanted to have a protocol which gives safety to the passengers. So they started demanding a faster turnaround time. And it was earlier that 3 days back RT-PCR report was getting accepted. Now we are thinking of 4 hours RT-PCR report being accepted. So what we see is that if the diagnostics has to support the detection part and the diagnosis part in a situation where the whole nation gets affected, we have to use technology which has to evolve to make it, easily available, cost effective. And one more issue which we realized when we started, RT-PCR was the confirmatory test. Then came the antigen test. Antigen test had a limitation in the sense that it could give more false negative. But because the scaling up had to happen very fast, the government sector did a lot of antigen testing. The private sector generally stuck to the RT-PCR test. And we had a time where there was discordance in the reports, antigen and RT-PCR, different platforms, different also learned how to, correlate these results, how to, within the framework of what was allowed and shared, created by the government, how to satisfy the customers. With partial opening, corporates also wanted their employees to be checked. But as per the norms, in the early phase, the RT-PCR needs a prescription. Prescription can be given only as per a certain criteria. So the corporates were not fitting in that criteria. So there was a lot of, waiting and frustration and delay at times to normalize also. Because when we opened, everybody wanted to become normal and it was required for the economy also. So I think the government also realized that some things which have to evolve, they must work in a faster manner, and the sector has to align with them. I think that is the biggest gain. And now I see that the government is engaging the private sector. ICMR was from the beginning engaging the labs. So all the labs which got the approval, they used to have a weekly call, hear out their problems, have a discussion, reframe the policies. I think that was a very good achievement. Collectively, the government and the private work together and to get as best as possible, at least in the wave one, we were doing better off, but wave two actually showed that the whatever infrastructure we have, if the surge is too fast and too high, then it was found wanting.
No, that's great. Just to take your point, right? How do you ramp up infrastructure? And there is a need to build infrastructure, and there's no denial of that. And how do we do it faster? How do we beat time? Essentially, hacking time, hacking workflows is all that happened, and it's evident now. My key takeaway is very clearly, given that diagnostics played a crucial role from where we were as a situation to where we are, right? One of the data point that I look up to and I feel really overwhelmed looking at it again and again is today we are able to manage. Today we have about 2,000 to 2,500 COVID patients detected every day in India, and somewhere the point is for 100,000 people. So I just want to complete that. So when we have 2,500 patients for 100,000 people detected, a mere 60 doctors for 100,000 is what we have, cannot really detect and treat and diagnose and manage. So to that extent, the biggest evidence that diagnostics has played a exceedingly significant role is in this, that I think the switchboard, when I think about a switchboard and switch, the movement from sensing to acting came in very instantly. And since then, the entire diagnostic as a sector, medical device and diagnostics as a sector segment has always looked at how do I act the line of thinking now is about how do I make things happen, and not about how do I detect early alone, right? That takes me to the second question, and the question about, how did the thinking move into doing? Because I know, in a consulting world, we always use a jargon that think, and do, or think, do. Now, these are different iterations of, how fast are we in terms of course correction. You had to do, I think, do, and think you had to think during your sleep. So coming back, very exciting to understand how did the switch happen. And Siraj, I think you were, you did get through a significant portion of the acting switch very fast. Now, what are your takeaways on execution, and how well have we managed that?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I think you are right. I mean, I don't think in this last crisis it was, we didn't have the luxury of thinking and then doing. I think it was all a blur. But let me tell you about InnAccel's experience, and then I'll touch upon the larger question of how well we as a country have done. Uh, it was, like I said, a trying time for InnAccel. And right at the beginning of the lockdown, we really were uncertain about our ability to survive. But the team pulled together, and what we managed to do in the first lockdown, basically April to July, was build two products for providing respiratory therapy for COVID patients. Uh, Now, I know we've talked a lot about diagnosis and being able to correctly identify patients. I think though in the first wave and definitely in the second wave, the gap was much more in being able to provide the basic treatment that a COVID patient, or frankly anybody with respiratory distress, because at that clinical point, I think the only difference that whether a patient has COVID or doesn't have COVID is on whether you isolate them from other patients. The respiratory therapy is the same. So we at InnAccel during the lockdown built a non-invasive ventilation system for COVID patients, and also a patient interface, something called a CPAP helmet or a hood. Thank you, Munaj. This is sort of covering over the head, which allows ventilation of the patient without allowing their infectious exudates and exhalations out. It was used a lot in Italy and China in the first wave. So in July, we launched these two products. We were, supported in our endeavor by a bunch of organizations. One of them called ACT, Action COVID Team, a group of venture capitalists who got together and raised money for this. Thermax Engineering, they partnered with us pro bono on development of the helmet. It was great. It was great, the spirit that was shown by large organizations, startups, all of them, in coming together to fight this. And we are much more old school engineering, I like to tell people. We build things. And while data and all of that is an integral part of a lot of things, I think what is sometimes overlooked is the difference that just good old mechanical, electromechanical engineering, material science work can make. So we built what we thought was a relatively rudimentary, non-invasive ventilation system and a helmet interface. We sort of optimized it while we were building the first batches and delivering them, and our customers were very patient with us. We had to sometimes come and do fixes on the fly. But we managed to deliver about 400 units of the non-invasive ventilation system. We presume they have saved about 20,000 lives in the COVID crisis, besides the helmet. And a couple of months ago, we had a very surprising revelation while talking to a global medtech leader. They were interested in these two products that we had built because there's a whole shift in focus of respiratory therapy towards non-invasive ventilation. Because we've all seen the bad outcomes that have been seen when patients are put on an invasive ventilator. Now, this to me is just amazing testimony to the team's ability that during a lockdown, battling no cars, no transport, sleeping in the office, the team built products that today a global medtech company may be interested in looking more towards licensing. And this really is the power of engineering, when it's applied towards the right problems. And, I just wish that we could have done a lot more of this before the crisis hit, as opposed to reacting just in terms of crisis.
I think, Siraj, you touched a very interesting thought here. When we were struck with COVID, and at that moment, what was very clearly evident was getting the delta right is far more important than building a magic wand, which will come in 3 months from now or 5 months from now and save the world, right?
Yeah.
I do remember the concept of super spreaders, which were talked about then, which actually truly turned out to be true, that there are 1-2 spreaders who could possibly cover a significantly large spread. So with these two going against us, the focus on getting that delta right, like you brought up, going back to basic sciences, mechanical, ventilation, saved lives, and it made a lot of sense to scale fast. That point seems very relevant, and hundreds of such technologies. Yes, Siraj.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, back to you, Siraj.
And at that point, if you remember, there was a lot of procurement going on for invasive ventilators. And we consciously took a call to not focus on that, but focus on non-invasive ventilation, knowing full well that we do not have the ICU infrastructure or the ICU doctors or the ICU nurses to effectively provide invasive ventilation. So you're absolutely right. We do not need to go for the absolute perfect solution, but we need to do what is effective and what works within our environment. And 9 times out of 10 is good enough. Vijay, I think your screen is stuck, or it's at my end. Anybody?
I think Dr. Raaghavan, your screen is stuck actually.
Yeah, am I visible? Yeah, am I audible and visible?
You are not visible to me actually. But
okay, maybe I leave the question with Jayanth and join back.
Sure.
Jayanth, given that you come from a non-traditional and a very different, unique background, how did you solve this problem, and what are the takeaways there?
Yeah, thank you, Vijay. I mean, first of all, big congratulations to Dr. Nigam and Siraj for having done some extraordinary work in testing and in getting non-invasive ventilators, etc., which is so important to manage this pandemic. But I'd like to take a different view of this, because while the pandemic or the COVID needs to be managed with the testing and all the things that needs to go to bring it under control, but we were doing what was within our control from the eye care perspective. And I'd like to give some concrete examples on that. So when COVID struck, obviously it affected people's lives and it affected them. But along with that, it also affected the whole economy, it affected the businesses, it affected the consumers, because the whole focus was on solving COVID, and the whole healthcare system was working towards that. But then the other ailments like eye diseases or any other diseases, for instance, were kind of taking a back seat because they were not on the priority, rightly so. But then we said, what can we do at this stage? Because there is also a need for that to happen, because you can't ignore them forever. So this is the example I wanted to share with you. So sometime back, with the innovation lab that we have, we set ourselves on a task to create simple diagnostic tools. Now, simply diagnostics tools, as most of you would have visited optical shops or ophthalmologists, the first step is to actually sit in front of a machine called a autorefractometer, which costs anything from 3 to 10 lakhs, which gives you the first set of prescription. And then the optometrist or the ophthalmologist refines those prescriptions sitting on a chair with a trial set of lenses, etc. So the challenge, we said that if you have to reach 2.5 billion people, there is no way you can actually have equipments worth 10 lakhs going around into each and every small village. So we had an open innovation challenge to create a simple diagnostic tool which will have no battery, no electricity, which could be portable, which could be carried in your handbag or your briefcase, and which would be as accurate. The fact is that we did come up with a solution which costs less than 2,000 rupees, which actually works to about 98% accuracy, like any of those big machines would do, and which can actually carry in your box. So then this was something which came up actually right before COVID. But what we did was to accelerate the scaling up of this, to set up production facilities in China and other places, so that we could produce huge quantity of them, which can actually be given to various people to go on to the first simple diagnostic, first simple test to check a good eyesight or not. So this was eye care in a box. So what we then did was we have a network of primary eye care providers called iMitra, whom we train and we give them grants to go and start primary eye care centers in far-flung villages. We gave them this box, and at the same time, we were working on a connection through teleoptometry, which is an Uber-like model, where each iMitra had a facility to connect as soon as he gets a patient. He throws up the job on the ether. There were 200 optometrists anywhere at any point, always connected. Anyone who's free picks up the job, would then connect online with the iMitra and go through the process of eye examination and refraction remotely, and finally sign off a prescription, which would then be delivered instantaneously by WhatsApp. So what we tried to do was to put all these solutions in a box and then ask these iMitras or the primary eye care providers to literally go house to house in every village and every small town and conduct eye examinations with the same level of quality as what a patient would get anywhere in the big cities. Now, this was a huge, this created a huge impact. First of all, there was a question of livelihood of the iMitras because nobody was coming to see them because of COVID. So they were then actually going and seeing patients. And secondly, for those patients or consumers in their houses, they could get the refraction done remotely and with the same kind of facilities. And they had access to good eye care, which actually helped them to see better and live better. So this was a simple innovation which we did. As of now, we have over 1,000 digital iMitras, as we call it, who are in really, really remote locations in India. And this is kind of leading the way for us to do the same thing in other markets like Bangladesh, Kenya, Indonesia, and even China. So actually, we are taking this innovation global. There's another thing which I wanted to give is that the impact of the innovation which was focused at the low-end base of the pyramid market had on the big cities. Now, obviously, in the cities, the situation was while the facilities were there, people were scared to go and see an ophthalmologist or an optician because they were scared of getting the infection. So they were postponing the tests. They were postponing their eye examinations. And the agony was they were spending more time in front of a computer or machine, probably much more than ever because of all the Zoom calls and everything. So they needed eye care support, but they could not get one or they did not want to go because of the fear of infection. So what we did was turned around and created a new business model where, again, the same thing, where people could go house to house and offer them free eye examination. And also they could take an image of the eye and transfer it to an ophthalmologist who could then read the condition of his eye and diagnose if he's got cataract, diabetic retinopathy, or all kinds of other eye diseases could be done with the simple image of the eye. And all this was able to be done remotely, which helped to create a new way of creating eye care access, even in the cities. And at the same time, even large organizations like large companies encourage their employees to get their eyes examined remotely, either at their workplace or at their home. And honestly, we've discovered a new business model in this whole COVID time, which is actually going to be scaled up, and even post-COVID, which actually is going to be probably the new way of getting your eye care delivery done in future. So all that has been a kind of learning for us during this COVID time.
Oh, you brought in a very interesting point, Jayanth. And if there's one, one significant area which had a very steep learning curve, then it's about those biomarkers. We started looking at eye as a biomarker, voice as a biomarker, text and tone as a biomarker, and multiple, some of the entrepreneurial friends of mine they have tried multiple such ideas, and a lot of learning has happened. And I would say that it's now ripe to understand whether they really are, when put to test in the subsequent years, right? How much can we extract out of them? Talking into the phone and my voice is a sample to assess my lung became a very interesting area to go deeper, and more samples. The learnings were far more. Like you brought out eye as a biomarker. We always are great at front of the eye and cataract, behind the eye and retina, and the conditions of the body. We are not so great. So in a way, this opened up a lot of assessment of what's going in the body using eye as a lens. And voice with text also played a critical role to understand the mental health. That when people are texting, when people are speaking, text and tone, how does it help us assess the state of mind? So that's a very interesting area, and hope to see a lot of growth there. The coming back to one of the other area which gained immense execution focus, maybe came from a lot with people's participation. Right? This is the first time we saw in healthcare where people had SpO2 machines with them. They read their SpO2 status and voluntarily came out and said, look, I have a problem. Can I get tested? So the people's participation in terms of proactively calling the health system for help across the 7 billion was consistent. And that meant a lot of execution requirement from the diagnostic end, right? So it's great to call, but then how do you create the infrastructure to reach your homes? And that's where I feel the steepness on execution was required. So diagnostic companies, medical device companies had to attend to the steepness of request. Dr. Puneet, what is your take on what transpired and executed?
So COVID paradigm shift actually forced evolution of a lot of internal systems. Especially if we want to set up infrastructure and labs, then looking at the molecular biology testing, it's a very niche area, and very specialized doctors and technicians usually do the testing. But here the need was to clone these in multiple locations, multiple geographies, and bring that expertise in a very short time, which is very difficult because we know even with training, the competencies take some time to convert it into a skill. So creating physical infrastructure, yes, that part was mastered relatively easily, but creating the personnel who are competent in terms of sample collection, which was the ever-growing need for labs. So we had to have a lot of phlebotomists who are collecting samples. So the conventional model of people walking into the lab or a collection facility, that was almost zero. And everybody was preferring a home collection. In fact, the guidelines also were recommending a home collection. So those teams had to be really beefed up in a very short time. And people were not available only because those numbers didn't exist in the market itself. So we had to literally shift our teams from routine testing to molecular testing and create an internal training program, validation, theoretical training, practical training in a ongoing manner, because the number of labs were increasing, the volume was increasing, the capacity was increasing. I think that was the toughest part. The training skilled manpower in a short time. You need the experts who are within the system to do the test also, report, and then utilize their expertise in training. I think that was a very challenging piece now, which we have mastered, so to say. So we use technology in that. So webinars, team meetings, which were never used earlier, they became, routine thing for communication, for training, for monitoring. Audits were done online using team meeting. And we migrated to a learning management system for training everyone in remote geographies. And so a lot of technology also got adapted within the organization and by public per se, because there was no other choice. Then there were supply chain issues. though samples were there, patients were there, but kits were not available. So when we started, all the kits were imported. So we have to wait when the shipments will be released, and the tests were growing much faster than the supply was coming. So the first 2-3 months was really challenging, and the supply chain had to expand, really explore all the possibilities from where to get the PPE, the consumables, and the kits. And we realized at some point that we also have to partner in the development. So with the vendors, we started working in developing kits, and a lot of vendors came, a lot of Indian vendors came who brought products, and the supply chain issue was, I think, solved in 6 to 8 months. And the cost of production also, because it was in India, in-house, the cost went down significantly. That also helped in kind of managing the cost of creating a lab and running it. Then we had, so after 8 months, I think everybody was hoping on the vaccine. It was thought that first vaccine would be launched in August, then September, then December. So we were also partnering with the pharma companies in the testing side of the vaccine. So it was not just the RT-PCR tests we were doing, we were also supporting the kit manufacturers and the pharma companies. So it was a very, very holistic approach from our side, trying to support anybody and everybody who's part of that ecosystem which is going to manage the disease. And so we were stretched in the sense that because all of these activities are highly skilled activities, and in the normal scenario they were a certain part of the overall operations, and suddenly we had such large focus on them, and the normal business got significantly affected. I think more than 70% of it. So there was manpower which was idle, but which was not, competent to do most of the work which was getting generated. So our collection centers were closed. So we also started thinking in how to upskill these people, use the manpower. I think these 3-4 things were very, very, very difficult in the initial phase. And we also realized the way we are testing, like the initial RT-PCR kits were with extraction, which is a manual procedure to begin with. And all these steps are very, very sensitive steps. And you make an error, the final result will go haywire. And we realized if we have to improve the TAT, then these steps have to be automated. So very early in our journey, we migrated to the automated systems to manage the volumes and to reduce the errors also, because from the sample collection to the registration, whether in the hard copy or app, there are more than 50 steps where the phone number can be wrong, the patient name can be wrong, address can be wrong, district can be wrong. In the testing part, all the steps from extraction to master mix preparation to the final PCR, they were all manual. So what we learned, and anyway, we believed and knew the benefits of automation, but the automation was not available to a large extent for molecular testing. And since the need came, the technology and the instrumentation also came in. I think government also played a very supportive role, and we migrated to the automated testing platforms, and that really helped us to scale the capacity from beginning with 300 tests in a day. Now we scaled up to more than 20,000 tests in a day. So it's been a long journey that way, but it's a and in healthcare, I think you said whether to do or to plan or to do. I think in our line, we can't do because we have to get it right. So the planning has to be, we have to start with a plan and then continuously monitor and evolve and ensure everything is right, because there is no way that you can be wrong when you release the report. So
very interesting point, Dr. Puneet, and it's coming out so well that we're coming to the last bout of the discussion, and one of the points that you stressed upon, right? In traditional science, in traditional business terms, we talk about business models that are aimed at economies of scale. Right now, that's traditional. But here we are put a situation where we can't sit down and think about how to reinvent something or how to discover something which has economies of scale, and yet deliver something at scale which don't have economic sense and save the economy, right? So it was a very difficult situation for us to go through. And I'm sure there was more cash burn, heartburn in the beginning. And that scale led to a certain discovery today to be a lot more, in control of, right? So that takes me to the last point of this last run before we take on. I think we should give more time for our folks to also ask questions. But very interesting. We've gone through this wave. COVID is just one of those pandemics, right? COVID exits. There are discussions on exit, but the point is flu enters. COVID exits. So hundreds of such communicable conditions come back in, and that's the normality as we start talking. And Dr. Puneet, you know it. The normality of continued testing is going to be there, irrespective of COVID or other viruses. Now, coming back, right, given this, what do we think we have done far better, and what have we done which has shaped ourselves well to maneuver similar such challenges, with ease, without actually going back to, to a point where Siraj said, where you don't go through a bolt on the blue, right? You rather come out with solutions which are easily done, tested, proven. So you seamlessly run your engine and economy well. So Siraj, running this thought, what have we really done well, which is far more sustainable, and what do you take away from here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has happened, and it's been long due, is that there has, I think, healthcare and specifically public provision of healthcare is now being seen with a bit more seriousness than it was before. I think COVID has very tragically, made it very stark that if my hospital does not have oxygen, I will die. And that's in a matter of minutes or hours. Right. I mean, the other problems always felt like they were much more diffused and, it was sort of taken as granted. But here, I think, and, the second wave demonstrated that. I think in large part, the ferocity of the second wave was artificial. I mean, it was spreading a lot faster. But the fact that the places where it hit, the rural areas, very few of these places had adequate provision of simple oxygen therapy, much less, ventilation modes. So a lot of people who died in the villages, frankly, would not have if they had been in a moderately sized city where basic provisions were available, except for those 2-3 weeks where, in Delhi and Bangalore also oxygen was not available. And I hope that this kind of raises our level of urgency and, draws a line a bit higher about what is acceptable or what is not. Because to me, it's a matter of national shame that people would die because we are not able to give them simple oxygen therapy. And, I'm hoping that the public healthcare system, I mean, they are ramping up a lot. You hear a lot about equipment purchase and all of that. So that is a good sign. I just hope that, it's a sustained effort. It does not yet end up being equipment purchased and put in storerooms, extra beds set up and not being used, because we'll face this perennial problem of the people not being there. And to me, that is probably the most critical part of the problem that I don't know whether we've even looked at, which is how do we multiply the effective, sort of human resources in healthcare, at least in times of crisis. We have to have a mechanism of rapid upskilling of ASHA workers to doing a GP's job, GPs to doing a respiratory therapist's job, and so on. And I think that is one area where I really hope we can make some progress if, pandemics like this become the new norm.
Yeah, that's true. And if I just borrow one of what Dr. Puneet said, 600,000, effectively we have 600,000 ASHA workers. We had to clone them into 10 times. With 1 million doctors, we had to clone them into another 10 times. So the entire steepness, I think it reminds me of the letter P, where preparation, provisioning, the entire pandemic amplification to ensure we're able to purchase fast, we're able to bring back to a point where we are multiplying the ability to maneuver was very steep, and that's one lesson that's learned and very well managed. I'm sure going forward, we are well prepared for managing that scale in terms of quadrupling capabilities and achieving that results. Right. Back to you, Jayanth. You spoke a lot about back to roots, and I know a lot of things went back to basics. What's your take in terms of what do we carry from here, which is really here to sustain?
Yeah, I mean, taking off from what Siraj said, I think first of all, I'm very hopeful that these increased healthcare spends will continue even post-COVID, because I think one thing it has demonstrated how grossly underspending we are doing on healthcare. So, and I'm sure that the governments will continue to spend more. And the dream is one day we will have universal healthcare for everyone in India and in the world, because I think that's for me, it's a fundamental right for any human being to have universal healthcare. So that's one thing I'm quite positive about. I think the second thing is that going forward, this with the use of technology, it will be a leveler, and it will help us to bring equitable access to healthcare to everyone, everywhere in the world. And I think this will be a big shift, because it's not only to the privileged few who have access, but with the access with technology, with all that we have, will help us to kind of bring this access to everyone in the world. And that will also lead to universal healthcare, which is, I think, an important topic. The other thing is that we've started collecting a lot of data now and building huge data lakes with information about people, which actually can be really very powerful if it's leveraged properly. And I think there's lots of great work happening. You talked about voice markers, retina markers. Retina marker is a reality, because you can, I think, today identify up to over 40 ailments just by a picture of retina, which is non-invasive. Anything from a cardiac function disease to even a COVID can actually be diagnosed with, or the risk factor can be assessed with an image of a retina. Likewise, there are other things. So I think the possibility of having billions of data points in a huge data lake, which can be driven using the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually speed up diagnostics and speed up at least the basic diagnostics, will be a big boon to the medical community, which is so grossly understaffed. So I think that will be a big change. And I think very soon, as a part of your regular health checkup, one would just have to take a picture of your eye and of your, or a sample of your voice, etc. And by looking at that, people will be able to tell you at what risk level you are. And imagine something like this will help a lot of people. For instance, an insurance company, which has been today managing diseases, from managing diseases, they can go on to managing risks. So if they had access to information about a patient saying that these are the risk levels, then it could be much more easier, and you could have lower premiums or higher premiums depending on whatever risk levels you have. So it opens up a huge number of opportunities in all these things. So overall, well, I know that we are all going through very tough times around the world, and India is coming out of it pretty rapidly, pretty soon. And I think it's a question of a few months or where we actually have everything under control, and then we start treating it like an endemic, not like a pandemic, and learn to live with this virus, which will be with us for some time, I guess, or something else may come, like you said. But what it will do, I think, is that if all this can help us to improve access, the way we diagnose diseases and the way we deliver and manage diseases impactfully, that would be a big win. And I'm very hopeful that with all these learnings, and I think if there was any pressure test for the world to see whether it can survive or not, the COVID has been the best pressure test, I would say. So, and I think we've all come out stronger after that. And I'm saying we've come out stronger, or you're coming out stronger, if I may say that. But it's a question of, it's about how we use these learnings to our advantage for our future generations.
It's been a great discovery in this last 1 hour to understand from where we began, right? In terms of the hats that we wore, the problems that we were faced upon, and how new things came, going back to basics, building of primary care, going back to devices in terms of ensuring we're able to treat patients. I think Siraj brought in the element of how do I innovate and how do I corner and how do I have a helmet model to solving problems so that you don't infect others and yet be effective at a person level. Jayanth, you brought a lot of thoughts around this entire eye becoming an important area, and how we kind of brought eye into mainstream for detection and management. And Dr. Puneet, you were put to test all through, and then really that's been the journey, right? And that one thing that's a big takeaway is, as healthcare, we not let things down. There's been a massive effort to bring every energy in. This is when radiology and pathology got together, and they got together with data, voice. So in a way, the re-engineering of all these larger modes was happening as we spoke, and to churn that one report to save a life, right? To detect early. Very interesting set of pointers. One of the thing in these panels is it's amazing to listen into this diverse view. I want to jump fast into questions, and there've been more number of questions waiting before the panel discussion started. So that's the extent of curiosity and keenness. So without wasting much time, Siddharth, over to you. Let's see if we can take some questions and then move it across the panel. Over to you, Siddharth.
Sure, absolutely. So we've received some questions from before. So the first question is from Mr. Abhilash Chakravarti, Director IPV. He asks, in the healthcare industry where price is controlled by government, how will innovation work when there is no financial return on investment? So if anybody would like to take this up.
Yeah, from lab side, I can share our experience. Sure. When we started in the COVID, the prices were very high for all the raw materials because most of it was imported. So the cost was high, the duties were high, and our purchase price was very high. And we never thought in the month of March that we would have the current price system. It was unimaginable. The prices have come down by almost 10 times, at least 8 to 10 times, which means that and I can say from diagnostics, we are using almost 80% imported material, whether it is equipment, kits, consumables, plastics. And that adds to the cost of the healthcare and what the patient pays or whoever is paying. And if we are manufacturing it, and the manufacturers now are using technology which is the cutting edge technology in the world. And that technology is available at a very, very low price. So I think the understanding of the cost is also a dynamic thing. And as you said, if you apply the first principle, you never know that the cost can be, literally nothing for a technology. So if you have an instrument like a breath test for COVID, you purchase the equipment and you do n number of testing from that. So there's no other setup cost, there's no there's no capex, it's just one device. So the cost per test can go down. So I think to manage the cost, innovation is the key. And if we innovate and we make locally, I think that's the solution which we are looking for.
Siraj, Jayanth, do you want to take any of these, this question, or we move on?
I think we can move on. Dr. Nigam has articulated it very well. I completely agree with him.
Awesome. Yeah, Siddharth, back to you.
Certainly, very, very well put, and thank you. And some more specific questions. So Yogesh Lagotia, lead scientist at Health Hub India Private Limited, he asks, how consumer adoption of home use medical devices are coming along, in your opinion?
Sure, I can address that. I think during this COVID time, a lot of us were very reluctant to go to hospitals for routine checkups or meet doctors for fear of infection. And one of the areas where we saw that reluctance was in pregnant women going for their prenatal checkups into hospitals. Now, one of the technologies that we've developed prior to COVID is a new technology for pregnancy and labor monitoring. And we developed it, with a view to making labor monitoring much more easier to perform, completely de-skill it, and make it basically 21st century ready with wireless data access and cloud enablement and so on. What we noticed was a lot of interest in our solution from a home monitoring perspective. Doctors wanted to use their solution to give it to moms to perform the monitoring themselves. The data would go to the doctor's cell phone via cloud. It could go to the hospital's central data repository and so on. Definitely there has been a move, just like there has been a move to work from home. There has been the beginnings of a move to monitor from home, diagnose from home, possibly treat from home as well. And I think that will only accelerate.
So if I may just add to Siraj's point, I think she is very right. And in fact, I would say we did some studies before, and there's a growing appetite, and I think consumers want to do a lot of things themselves. And if there was an option, they would probably treat themselves as well. So this is a bit of a tricky situation. But I think as manufacturers, as healthcare professionals, while we have to make the consumer adoption easy, at the same time, we have to make sure that the professionals are kept in the picture. And there is, while there's a tendency to self-diagnose and self-medicate, we should moderate that down, because at the end of the day, you are still safe in the hands of a professional. What I think we are trying to do is to make the life of the healthcare professional easier by doing certain basic things by the consumer, but ultimately the decision will have to be resting at the expert's hand. So this is a tightrope walk which we'll have to walk as we free up this whole access issue. But definitely from a consumer perspective, all studies have shown that adoption of technologies and adoptions of devices which they can use it themselves is on the rise, and the willingness is at a very, very high level.
Wonderful, wonderful. So just coming on to another question which we've received from Jayanth Bhagat, founder of Athanasius Pharma Private Limited. He says that his company focuses on improving the primary clinical practice of community health workers in rural and semi-urban India, and these areas lack infrastructure, proper diagnostics are updated with latest medical fraternity. He's asking, how can modern methods of technology reach these sections which correspond to over 70% of the population, and where basic healthcare is still a challenge, reaches a challenge there. So how could modern tech reach these spaces?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add once, and then see one emerging trend that we also clearly seeing, right? Since the fact that we're talking about diagnostics and the devices, the compute capability of devices are shifting to cloud, so they're becoming lighter on premise. That brings down costs, and so on one side you're looking at how do I come up with smart devices which have far lesser compute on premise and move computation logics to a very larger distance on a cloud, right? So that's one. There is an attempt to bring down costs, so that you're talking about a lighter X-ray, a value CT, a value device coming in. On the other side, we also have relevant innovations which are scalable. The point is, a wearable is what we talk about, but can wearable be scaled across as good as a smartphone app? These are all coming in dialogue. And as we speak, there's 600 million smartphones, and it's not about rural or urban, right? Can I use a device which can smell faster? Can I use a camera of a phone which an ASHA worker has and yet discover things early? Now, some of these are developing when we look at problem solving. But yes, the very intent of solving with different technologies comes at a certain cost and accuracy and consistency, right? So we will have to see as time flows in, but the directionality is different solutions for different problems for different set of people, And hence, going back what Siraj rightly pointed, that you can't have one fit device for everything. Technology or data is not the king for everything. It's about play to the day's need, and those delta improvements make a lot of difference. So you don't have to think about how do I take a smartwatch to a village where there is no internet. Rather, take what is relevant there and use that for problem solving, in addition to using a smartwatch in an area where you have internet. Right? It's a combination that you work around to solve a problem.
Wonderful, wonderful. Mr. Jayanth also had a point.
No, I completely agree with Vijay, but there was another related point I had. The whole sector is famous for working in silos. So, we create primary eye care workers, somebody else creates primary healthcare workers, the government creates health and wellness clinics. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they're all trying to reach the same patients in the villages, etc. But I think there is a case for now even more collaborative approach and collective approach. For instance, I'm happy to open up the entire 10,000 iMitras I have today to Dr. Jayanth and to other people to actually carry out, because you don't need to invest in infrastructure. They're already there, and they could be your blood sample collection centers. They could do instant sugar tests. They could do other kind of things. And plus they have internet connectivity, and they could be used for that. But I think it's a question of how can we scale together with the power of technology to provide the ultimate healthcare access in the primary care level. So that's the kind of thing. So the point which I wanted to say was more about a collaborative approach, and I think we should all try to connect the dots and create that critical mass, which will create the impact. This is what I believe.
Excellent points, and I think our members would have taken home a lot from that. I'll just come to one last question now in the best interest of time. This comes from Mr. Ashwani Thakur, Regional Director, Arogya World. He says that NCDs are the cause of almost 60% deaths in India. COVID also put people with existing comorbidities at a much higher risk and a valuable position. What are organizations doing to address NCDs among their employee population?
Well, if nobody has a relevant response, I have a flippant one. I find this whole focus on reducing deaths by, the proportional deaths by NCDs, if we want to reduce it, what exactly are we trying to do? Because you either die through a non-communicable disease, you die through a communicable disease, or you die through trauma. So, I think the fact that NCD deaths are increasing as a proportion of deaths is actually a good thing. It's an alternative to dying with a bacterial infection or dying with a head wound because of being bludgeoned to death, which were the main causes of death in the past. So, sorry, but I just wanted to make that point that I just don't know. I'm sure we need to make people healthy, and wellness should be a focus, but I think NCD as a cause of death being bad is not a very appropriate point of view. I'll stop there.
Sure, certainly. Would Dr. Nigam like to share?
Yeah, I would add, Siraj is saying absolutely right. In developed countries, we know that the NCDs are responsible for majority of the deaths. And in developing countries, the infectious diseases contribute more. So as we evolve, as we develop, the NCDs are going to be contributing more and more. But I think maybe the questionnaire also wants to understand that is it a bad situation? I would say if life expectancy is increasing every year and we reach 80, 85 and NCDs are contributing a larger number, then I think there is no complaint. So there is a healthy life and a life expectancy higher, and then NCDs contributing more is I think the future. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, and really good points. And now I think if Dr. Raaghavan would like to close.
I'm really happy that we could give some time for the participants to raise their questions, and very high quality questions. And definitely the key takeaways here are, we built something very relevant, scalable, And yes, you can already see sustainable value creation. The question is, how are we applying these principles to other diseases and develop that preparedness on a more holistic note? So that's my major takeaway. Maybe we take a round with Siraj, Jayanth, and Puneet once, before we wind up, in terms of key takeaways from here and how do we go from here. What's that one lesson you picked up from here?
Sorry, Vijay, do you mean from the whole COVID crisis and experience, or from this chat?
That's right.
I'll let Puneet go first.
Yeah, I think this COVID pandemic has given a wake-up call to everyone that health is of the utmost importance. We all know that, but nations don't necessarily focus on that. And especially developing countries like India, we have many other priorities which take the budget, the focus goes out, and unfortunately, whatever has happened has forced everyone at public level, at government level, at healthcare delivery system level, that we have to really correct our act if we want to avoid future disasters, which maybe we are already having large, many diseases where we are number 1 and number 2 in the world. But unknown diseases, if they are going to strike, then it will be really bad. So I think collectively as a healthcare system, we have to think, and everybody has to contribute, bring synergy so that the cost goes down. I think that's the only way it is going to work.
Well, my big learning from this whole pandemic has been the way the private sector, the government sector, the non-government sector, all of these elements came together, and you could see things move. I mean, on a daily basis, you would still be frustrated that things were not moving fast. But if you take a weekly or a monthly look at how things moved, it was incredible. The way, capital came into play, the way expertise from different areas came into play. People were contributing day and night. I think that was the other learning from these, work from home and remote working and Zoom calls. Their day does not end at 6 or 7 p.m. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I think to me, that was a big learning, the way we could actually respond when faced with a crisis. And that just to me, as Puneet was saying, makes it imperative that we continue this, and we, on a sustained basis, even in non-crisis situations, we at least up our game a little bit, the way we've demonstrated we can in this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for me, I think like I said before, one thing is that I'm very hopeful and happy that healthcare will get the kind of attention that it deserves, even post-COVID, and COVID has helped us to highlight the underfunding, etc. But more than that, on a personal note, I'd like to thank Dr. Nigam and Siraj and Vijay here, because for me, I think it's been a big learning experience here, being a part of this panel, to really see firsthand how, when Dr. Megan talks about ramping up his number of lab by 12 or 15 numbers within a short time span, at reduced capex, at reacting quickly, and at the same time, even with Siraj, changing his business model completely to come back to design a non-invasive ventilator, etc. Has been amazing stories. You tend to read these stories in newspapers or business magazines, but to actually have live interactions with fellow panelists, which gives me a sense of pride. At the same time, a lot of optimism that we are in safe hands. We have the right people who are looking at the right solutions, and this augurs very well for the future. So thank you to my fellow panelists and to Vijay and Siddharth for putting this thing together. And personally, I think I'm going back a lot more richer in knowledge and experience post this 90 minutes of discussion. Thank you very much.
No, back to you, Siddharth.
So thank you so much. It's been such an insightful and engaging conversation and a privilege to hear you all. Our leaders and I have taken home several nuggets from today's conversation, and I still continue to receive messages on my WhatsApp. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining in and for staying till the end and for always sharing excellent questions. For the questions that may not have been addressed due to paucity of time, I will share the relevant ones with the leaders on the panel and request some of their time for it. We will also try to post the answers in the community app as well. So along with our weekly webinars and our publication, we're taking these discussions and conversations live on the exclusive app, which is curated for leaders across 6 sectors that are healthcare, logistics, energy, e-mobility, real estate, and aerospace and defense. So whether you would like to engage with us on our platform, leaders are invited to connect and join the healthcare circle and also get access to the other allied circles as well. So thank you very much once again, sirs. It's been an absolute privilege, and we look forward to having such discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, all. Thanks, all. Thanks.
Bye.
Well, thanks for having us here. And Siddharth, great panel. Dr. Vijay, thank you for your insightful questions.